You're listening to the Low Pressure Podcast, the podcast for skiers.
So how have you been doing, like, mentally, personally, since that happened? You know, like, there's a lot of things to contemplate, right? Like, you were buried. Like, can I ask you what was going through your head?
Yeah, well, I was pretty lucky that I was with, like, the crew that I was with that day, because, you know, there was 6 people all watching me pretty closely. Like, I was the only one actually skiing that little pillow zone. It was kind of like a lunch break for those guys. They were content with, like, hanging for a little bit. So it was, I knew, like, when I was under there that it was kind of all hands on deck, and they were all close to me, and there was, like, should have really been nothing impeding the recovery. Like, as far as, like, getting to a victim who's buried, like, it was as good as it could have been. Mm-hmm. So I had the peace of mind under there, knowing, like, they're coming, right?
And, like, was it like was there a panic moment where you're like, okay, calm down? Like, we had to, like, talk.
I mean, at first when you can't breathe under there, for sure.
Did you have an air pocket or anything?
No, nothing. But, like, and my arm was shattered, but I was in shock. I think, like, I can't really remember thinking about my arm when I was actually buried until, like, I was able to breathe when they finally got my face out and my arm was underneath me. I was, like, upside down head first, kind of. Mm-hmm. And once I could breathe, then it was all about the arm thing. But before then, it was just like I can't breathe. And did you like black out? I was very close. I think, like, by the end, I was for sure fading, because I remember right before I got hit by the probe. That's, like, when it started to, like, panic again, because I kind of knew that, like reality sets in. I was, like, getting a little bit content, kind of, like, tired. Oh no, like okay, sleepy.
This is
I was getting just sleepy, basically, which is kind of surreal. It's hard to explain, but I had to be really calm, because as soon as you try and breathe, you can't. But if you try and just take the slowest possible breath you could imagine, like the gentlest, slowest breath you could imagine, and then breathe out the same way, like, I was able to pull just, like, a tiny bit through just the snowpack around. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of what kept me going for the 5 minutes or whatever. And
did it feel like an eternity? Like,
yeah, kind of. I don't know. It's so hard to explain. Like, yes and no at the same time.
Yeah.
It was a weird experience, and it's not something I wish on anyone. Obviously, it's pretty grim. And knowing that, like, how comfortable I started to get all of a sudden, just tired and, like, it's like you're dying. That's what dying feels like, and it's not a nice place. And then when I got hit with the probe, that was like a major, like, re-alert the senses and, like, try and breathe again and can't, and know that they're close. So it's almost like, do you almost, like, start to panic? Be like, okay, let's go. Like, yeah. Now you're here. Now I'm like, you get another blast of adrenaline probably, and you're like, let's do this. And you like start to realize. And I think by that point it had been about 5 minutes, and so, like, the shock about the arm started to wear off a little bit too, and because my wrist was, like, 2 inches back from where it was supposed to be. It was rubberized. And then I had, like, all this chest trauma, and, like, I was spitting up blood and stuff because I had some bleeding inside my lungs and everything, and it was, like, pretty grim. And as soon as I could breathe, once they got to me and I could breathe, then it was, like, major pain started to hit, because the shock had kind of worn off, and then I was super cold too. Like, I mean, you're in, like, an icy box,
packed
right?
in ice, yeah, right.
Yeah, and it was, like, a pretty nice day. Like, it wasn't a super cold day, you know. It was, like, kind of a nice, like, pleasant -7, and we were, like, in the sun and no wind, and, you know, we had tons of down jackets and stuff, and I had basically everyone's jackets piled on top of me and stuff, and I was still just freezing cold, like, shivering and in the sun from the shock, I guess. And yeah, it's crazy kind of what the cold does to you. But
holy man,
yeah, it was relieving to get the helicopter ride, for sure.
And, you know, and the fact that you said, you know, that's the group of people in the city. Like, it just was, if that's going to happen, that's the situation you want to be in.
Well, I can only imagine all the other times that I've been just, like, kind of party shredding through some pillows or whatever with some friends who maybe are a bit less experienced than the people I was with. And, like, had I been at the back of the group and broken a pillow and got stuffed into a hole, and my friends were downhill a little bit, and they, you know, at the bottom of the pillow field, they look up and I'm not there, and they're like, what happened? And then they got to transition and try and hike up, and there's no signal. Like,
yeah, it's going to take a lot more than 5 minutes.
And then, like, a helicopter can't just land nicely because you're, like, in the woods, you know. Like, we had, like, a big flat lake for them to come to. Like, there was just so many things that kind of did go our way.
There's so many things that went right.
Yeah, despite the, like, you know, the equipment failure.
Jeez, man. Like, have you, now another question I have too is, like, with things like that, with, like, PTSD and things, have you been, like, talking to like a therapist or like a counselor or anything like that to kind of?
Not really. No, like, I've just been pretty open about it with people, and like especially like with my girlfriend and stuff and close friends, and yeah, I feel pretty good, but it's definitely like kind of brought back up some of those feelings. Like last spring we were at Micah Heli, and it was like a little bit of a warmer day, and you know they're famous for the pillows. Like the terrain there is just incredible, and it had gotten a bit warm, and this is like a little bit early in the season for a warming like we had, I guess. You know, kind of where like some of the lower snowpack starts to go a little isothermic, and it's still like pretty cold out, but like it hasn't had as much of an overnight freeze or something, and I broke a pillow off, just skiing, like, you know, kind of some of the smaller pillows that they have there.
Yeah.
And I broke a pillow off, and it propagated in like the whole little pillow face, which is like just a small little film face, you know, not a huge slope or anything, but it was big enough that like suddenly we were like, the whole group was just like, I guess we're not skiing pillows anymore. And it was like the first run we tried to do pillow skiing, and it was kind of like
the same crew.
Yeah, it was Mac and Listy and Aaron Whitley, and yeah, same pretty much the same crew.
All right,
minus a couple, but yeah,
we're going home.
So yeah, so we like, okay, I guess we're just gonna ski like couloirs in the Alpine or whatever. You know, you just totally switch your plan, and because like if you think about pillows, they are kind of all little micro cornices, and so it's kind of a deep winter type of a thing, right? As soon as there's any kind of spring type conditions, like those things get a little spicier, and it was just a little bit of well, it just reminded me of like, you know, how serious things can get in such like simple, I mean, it's not like simple terrain like according to the Avalanche textbooks, right? But like for a film crew to be in like little mini pillows, like little 10 to 15 foot drops, like we're not talking huge pillow stacks, we're talking about like routine like small pillows for film crews, and for how serious I could have been had I not, like I was able to basically like straight line out the pillow field, and it all kind of crumpled behind me, but the blocks that came down, like the size of small cars and stuff, you know, and had I been like stuffed under one of those things, it's like ice axe kind of block. Like, you wouldn't have been shoveling through that. You would have like needed.
It's wild, man. Like cornices are no joke. I remember like the horseshoes just on Whistler.
Yeah.
I remember cruising up to them one day. Like I've skied off them since I was 18 or whatever. I remember cruising over to one day. It was kind of a foggy day, and I was standing probably about 4 feet from the edge of it, because sometimes they're big and sometimes they're not that big. So and all of a sudden, crack! It fell from beneath my legs.
Yeah.
So I went down, and I ended up just sitting, like legs hanging over the side. I ended up sitting on the edge, and I watched this minivan size block roll down through the thing, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And Buddy dove over and pulled me back up, and I was like, "I'm done."
They're real, and they're always
that's inbounds in like a controlled zone.
And they'd
right?
probably hit that thing with a stick of dynamite. How many times over the year, you know, like and how many people had stood right where you were all season, right?
Right.
But yeah, snow is a pretty crazy medium.
You've been listening to the Low Pressure Podcast, the podcast for skiers. This has been a Redmark Media production.